Hi, this is Reverend Dr. Nadine Rosechild Sullivan, and this is Sunday, June 20th, 2021. And I want to just come to you tonight, and I want to first off wish all of you who are fathers, or all of us who have had fathers, or who may become fathers, I want to wish us all happy Father's Day in that sense. It's really important sometimes to think about where things come from in our culture. And I'm going to take this opportunity to read just a little section from Wikipedia, not the best source in the world, but reliable enough in this case to tell us sort of the history of Father's Day. On Mother's Day, I talk about the history of Mother's Day as being rooted and grounded in the effort of those who were pacifists and those who were opposed to war, women, feminist women, women's rights activists who began to push for recognition, for to call for mothers all over the world to come together in opposition to war. Father's Day was founded in Spokane, Washington at a YMCA in 1910 by a woman named Sonora Smart Dodd, who was born in Arkansas. Its first celebration was June 19th, 1910, a connection to Juneteenth, or a non-connection to Juneteenth, but Juneteenth is June 19th as well. Her father, the Civil War veteran, William Jackson Smart, was a single parent who raised his 6 children after their mother died in childbirth, which was really common back then, and unfortunately still all too high in the United States. We don't have good maternal or fetal or maternal or infant mortality rates in the United States. But so her father, the Civil War veteran, William Jackson Smart, was a single parent raising 6 children after hearing a sermon about Anna Jarvis's Mother's Day, which was, one of the women who was part of promoting that call of pacifism for women and for mothers to come together at Central Methodist Episcopal Church in 1909. She told her pastor that fathers should have a similar holiday honoring them. Reasonably so. Although she initially suggested June 5th, her father's birthday, the pastors of the Spokane Ministerial Alliance did not have enough time to prepare their sermons, and the celebration was deferred to the 3rd Sunday of June. It did not have much success initially. In the 1920s, Dodd stopped promoting the celebration while she was studying at the Art Institute of Chicago. It faded into relative obscurity, even in Spokane. In the 1930s, she returned there and started promoting the celebration again, raising awareness at a national level. She had the help of those trade union groups that would benefit most from the holiday. For example, the manufacturers of ties, tobacco pipes, and any traditional presents to fathers. So a little bit of capitalism got in there at that point. And then, so that's 1930s, a hard time under capitalism. And because of the Great Depression, since 1938, she had the help of the Father's Day Council, founded by the New York Associated Menswear Retailers, to consolidate and systematize the commercial promotion. Maybe the biggest reason we think about giving ties for Father's Day. In 1957, however, Maine Senator Margaret Chase Smith wrote a proposal accusing Congress of ignoring fathers for 40 years while honoring mothers, thus singling out just one of our 2 parents. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued the first presidential proclamation honoring fathers, designating the 3rd Sunday in June as Father's Day. 6 years later, the day was made a permanent national holiday when President Richard Nixon signed it into law in 1972. So just a little background on Father's Day. My own father transitioned in 2009, and so I cannot face-to-face wish him happy Father's Day any longer. Rather like my husband of 24 years, he was not very given to receiving gifts on Father's Day. He sort of pushed it all away. And with my ex-husband, when I or the children gave him gifts, he often returned them. It was whatever. But anyway, for all of you fathers who are too unassuming, a good father is really significant in studying the lives of women and women who have fought for other women across time. Oftentimes, a really key component to those women's lives was a father who believed in girl-child education. Even if we look at Malala who was fighting for girls' education and was shot in the head by the Taliban, but survived. Her father was a big proponent of educating both her and educating girls in their Swat Valley of Pakistan, and part of a global movement for girl child education that is, just a piece of that puzzle. But also, if we go all the way back into the 1840s and we start to look at the women who first began to promote equality of rights for women, in especially at that window of time, what we now call the first wave of women's rights activism or suffrage, it was fathers who believed in educating their daughters, who were a huge proponent. At one point, I had made flyers. I had made or printouts from my computer paper on 8.5 by 11 sheets with a black and white photograph of many of the women who were really key in early starting proposing women's equality, and at least in the United States. And so those women, and a little short bio write up, and and I kind of put them on this large empty kitchen wall, and it was my wall of fame for women who had fought for women. And as I sat there one day, just sort of standing back and leaning against the countertop and looking at them at some distance across a relatively large kitchen, and at this wall that was covered with these poster-sized printouts, I was just amazed at the absolute factor in almost each of their lives, without exception, of a father who believed in educating his daughter. And so just really important. Men really important in the lives of their daughters. Men can be really, certainly are, crucial in the lives of their sons. Men who teach children to grow up to be ethical human beings. Men who teach their children, who teach their sons to grow up to be men of good character, men who are kind and honorable, men who don't abuse women. An incredible gift to have a good father, whether you're a boy or a girl. It's just an incredible gift to have a good father. And I have to say, I had the privilege of having a good father. I've got stories and I've got issues, and there were ways in which he didn't help me with college, but he certainly had my back and that of all of his 5 daughters in regard to our education in grade school and high school, to really doing his absolute best to provide us, to pay for the school that we went to, and to do his best to provide us with the kind of education that would put our feet under us. He held some gender role ideology that I did not appreciate then and do not still, appreciate even at this distance, but he had held some gender role ideology about the roles we would fill in adulthood. And so he didn't necessarily perceive higher education. He didn't stand in our way, but he wouldn't help in any way. And there were enough other factors in our way that it was difficult for the 3 of his 5 daughters who've had college, and the 2 of his 5 daughters who've had postgraduate education. There were some problems there because he didn't see that, but he really made sure we got a quality foundational education. And I give him credit for that. He also, to my knowledge, never harmed any of us intentionally, and set a really good example of being, as someone called him once, a Renaissance man, in the fact that he did, for all of his ideology of there being a difference between men and women and what we were called to be, or the roles we were called to fulfill in life. He was very kind and loving with my mother, always, and never different than that in my sight, or any of ours. He was just solid and loving and kind. And he was also very into, for all of the ways he had some interest in sports, and he had played some sports, and he had a medical education, but he also had a real love of theater and the arts, and promoted that with all of his children, including his sons. So for all of the ways in which he still held a gender role ideology of masculinity that I take some issue with, he still also just marvelously modeled a man of vast interest and a wide interest, including music and voice and acting and writing and promoted my mother's painting and any child of his that could draw. So in any way that he could, he was behind us in regard to that. And for as many hours as he worked, trying to feed 12 children, and so 14 mouths to feed, for all of the hours that he put in, 80, 90 hours a week, whatever it was that he worked across my childhood, in my youth and childhood, in all of that, or our youths and childhoods, he, in all of those ways, I sat back once and counted how many actual live theater productions he took us to, and then, add a handful of movies. But they were very fussy about the movies being very, very Catholic. And, reading the Catholic Standard and Times to look up the score from the Catholic Legions of Decency on a film. I didn't get to see a lot of films in movie theaters in my youth, but we saw so many stage productions and so much, and opera and orchestras and just so many things. I was just like, how did that man squeeze that in and pay for that for as many children as got taken to each of those events, plus whatever babysitting was happening back at home for those who were too young to go. And so it was just actually amazing. So, in spirit, if he can hear me, and I believe he can, I want to take a moment to wish my father happy Father's Day. I want to take a moment to thank my ex-husband for being a really good dad in so many ways, and being a good part of how our children turned out to be good, quality, grounded adults. And so just fathers matter. Now, a bad father can be worse than no father at all, but a good father is clearly an addition to any and all of our lives. So thank you to all the good dads out there. And for all of us who have had good dads, may we rejoice in the gift that was. And for all of us who have not had good fathers, my condolences, and also, my hope that you found a good grandfather, a good uncle, or some other means of that component being a part of your life, either in childhood or adolescence or adulthood. Also, this is one day after Juneteenth, and after the first Juneteenth, to be listed as a federal holiday, where there's some difference between a federal holiday and a national holiday that I won't bother to go into. But happy Juneteenth to everyone who, to all of us, because we should all be celebrating and recognizing it now. I want to give a little background here on Juneteenth. So again, reading from Wikipedia, which professors never recommend, but nonetheless, Juneteenth's commemoration is on the anniversary date of June 19, 1865, of the announcement of General Order Number 3 by Union Army General Gordon Granger, proclaiming and enforcing freedom of enslaved people in Texas, which was the last state of the Confederacy with institutional slavery. Now hold that thought. So the Civil War had ended a few months earlier, and all of the peoples who had been enslaved were declared to be free as of that date, because Lincoln had actually done the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, so 3 years before the end of the war. But during the war, the Confederate States simply ignored him and said, "You're not the president of me. What does that mean that you signed a proclamation?" And so it didn't actually have any weight until the Civil War was actually ended. And through most of those Confederate states, there was that moment around the time of the actual end of the war. But however, wherever and whenever possible, slave owners did not go tell their folks. They didn't go tell the people they had held in bondage that I no longer own you, until they were forced to. So Union troops were making their way through the South and making sure that on plantation after plantation, these ex-slaves were informed that they had become ex-slaves. In Texas, so this is the date at which this happens, from General Gordon Granger in Texas. So the last state in which this was, of the historic Confederacy, in which this was being proclaimed. However, for a short while after the fall of the Confederacy, due to certain political considerations, slavery remained legal in 2 Union border states. That is in large measure because the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln signed did not include the border states. It included the states that had seceded from the Union and rebelled against the Union and the presidency of the United States and the Congress of the United States by declaring themselves a separate country. It didn't include these border states. And so it remained legal in Delaware and Kentucky, and it remained legal until the 13th Amendment, which constitutionally abolished chattel slavery, or the ownership of people, on December 6, 1865. So from June until December before the 13th Amendment went into effect. So in Delaware and Kentucky, there were some still considered to be enslaved and held in bondage from June to December of that year. And also with the final actual release of slaves by the Indian territories that had sided with the Confederacy, namely of the Choctaw Nation in 1866. So there were some indigenous Americans considered to be enslaved still and within Indian territories, right? Areas that the United States had not yet quite succeeded in taking away from the indigenous population in 1866. So now, Juneteenth, officially declared Juneteenth National Independence Day on the 17th of this month of this year. And historically known as Jubilee Day, Black Independence Day, and Emancipation Day, was declared a federal holiday in the United States, commemorating the emancipation of enslaved African Americans. It is also often observed for celebrating African American culture. And it was signed into law, so the Senate and the House and Biden on June 17, 2021, when President Biden returned from his travel to Europe to the summit and to his visitation with the president of Russia. So he returned on June 17th, 2021, and signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law. So let me wish you happy Juneteenth. All of us, no matter our race or background, should recognize this day as supremely important in the history of the struggle for freedom in the United States of America. That it was important in 1865. It has been important in African American communities ever since, and it should be important to all of us. It should have been before, but it should be from now going forward, now that it's been declared a federal national holiday as Juneteenth, National Independence Day. So with that, also let us consider that it moves us forward to celebrating the 4th of July as well. And again, as I often say, we have not lived up to the promises of July 4th, or to the promises of the Declaration of Independence, or the promises of the US Constitution. But the good thing in American history has been those people who have gathered together in organized collective action to continue to press for their freedom all the way through. This is also, we're getting toward the end of, this is also Pride Month. It's LGBTQ Pride Month coming up to the, I believe it'll be the 51st, no, 69. So 2019 was the 50th. So this should be the 52nd anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion in New York City at the Stonewall Inn, when LGBTQ people revolted against police entrapment and police harassment at bars, and what we recognize as the founding or the sounding bell in the fight for LGBTQ equality. There is a little history before that. There is the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis in the 50s, coming into the 60s, echo the East Coast homophile organizations, which were coming together to fight, and the walks around Independence Hall from 1960 to 1965 on July 4th, demanding equality for LGBTQ people. But all of that was coming to a head, and did come to a head on June 29th, I believe, 1969 in New York City, in Greenwich Village, at the Stonewall Inn and Christopher Street. And so happy Pride Month as well. So just bringing all of those together this day, June 20th, happy Juneteenth, happy Father's Day, and happy Pride, wherever you are, whomever you are. I want to wish you that. And before we end tonight, I want to just take a moment to talk to you about the importance of intuition. So, just in this moment, I want to tell you again, to remind you again, that you have intuition. Every single one of us, as human beings, has an internal GPS system, an intuitive guidance system that is meant to lead us around harm. We do not always listen to it. We many times argue with it. We are living in cultures that teach us that only logic matters. And if we have an intuitive gut feeling, we tend to dismiss them because we don't have a reason why, right? If I don't know a reason why, if I'm driving down the road and I get a twist in my gut that's like, yeah, don't go this way, go that way, turn left here, take the other route home. Overwhelmingly, human beings will have been trained by our culture to go, but why? But I don't have a reason. And sometimes we'll stubbornly stay on the path we were on instead of cutting off and taking that other route home. We'll be like, no, that way's longer, or sometimes that way gets congested, or whatever. We'll argue back in our own minds to our detriment. I have found when I've listened to my intuition across, especially the past 40 some years, where I've really had a practice of meditation and a practice of contemplative prayer, those things tuned my awareness of my intuitive guidance system. I began to be aware about 40 years ago, maybe 41, 42 years ago. I began to be really keenly aware that there was a sort of internal red light, green light signal, as one of my early prayer teachers taught. There was, and taught me, that I came to recognize, yes, there's a time in my gut feeling is drawing me to do something, to go somewhere, to make a call, to reach out in some way. And there are other times my intuitive inner guidance system is twisting in a kind of uncomfortable feeling. If I start to do something, I have a conscious thought to go do this, and then I have this reaction that's like, no, don't. And if I've ignored that, it's been oftentimes a bad thing, right? So it's become clear that that signal is meant to keep me safe. I also want to say for a moment that I do refer to the subconscious. So there are these feelings that come to us, these knowings that come, and we can think of them as spirit or as subconscious. I know Freud talked about the unconscious, but the man was simply wrong. He did a lot of cocaine and he was simply wrong. He had some things right. I think he was right about his defense mechanisms. He was really off about the Oedipus complex in my estimation, and he was really off about penis envy. He was just like whack. I'm not saying that there's never been a gender non-binary or butch lesbian or trans boy or trans man who wouldn't have gone, yeah, me too, yeah, I agree with that. But the overwhelming majority of femme lesbians and the overwhelming majority of I'm trying to think, is my terminology right? The overwhelming majority of cisgender women just like are like, what? Why would I want one of those things? You know, penis envy's like not real for most of us, overwhelmingly. But so, you know, Freud was often wrong. He's wrong about the unconscious. It's not unconscious. Your subconscious and your intuition and your spirit, whatever we want to call it, it's just below the awareness. It's that feeling when something happens, you're like, oh, I knew that. You did know it. It's the thing you know, but you haven't quite said to yourself, right? And if you have a practice of meditating or a practice of just silent quieting the mind, a practice of pressing into intuition, of pressing into the spirit for a moment, of just setting even 5 or 10 minutes aside on a semi-regular basis, 3 to 5 times a week. And, you know, if you can't do it daily, but just to have a few minutes to come aside and be like, I'm quieting my mind. I'm quieting my mind. I'm paying attention to my breath. I'm feeling the air come in through my nostrils or down my windpipe, filling my lungs. I'm aware of my diaphragm. I'm pausing. I'm tuning into my bodily sensations, and I'm pausing, and I'm growing still. Things come. You remember your to-do list. right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't like, okay, note the thought and let it go. But you know, you remember, oh yeah, I wanted to buy tomatoes. I wanted to do this or that. You know, I wanted to make some sauce, right? You like the things come, oh, I promised my boss, I didn't do that yet. So things come to us, but that's important. That's guidance. It's the beginning of guidance. And then if we note those things and go deeper, I like to go into that space with a notepad on my lap and a pen in hand because I can jot down Tom for tomatoes. And when I come back, I look at it and go, oh, yeah, right. And my mother used to not let me leave the bedroom light on, and I was getting far too old to go to bed at 7:30. She was just tired of 12 kids. It was like, oh, you go to sleep now, you know. And so I was in my room with my three other sisters, because when you have that many kids, you share a room. And so four girls, and but the light has to be off. I've got younger sisters; they've got to go to sleep. So it's not enough that I'm upstairs letting my mother have a moment of peace. It's or our mother have a moment of peace, but it's also the lights got to be off because the little ones have to go to sleep, and they're 6 and 7 years younger than me, some of them. And so and the sister who's 1 year younger, but I'm writing poetry in the dark, or I'm writing poetry by the dim light from the hallway. And as I'm doing so, I got pretty good at moving my hand down a page so that I didn't do too much writing on top of my other writing. And I can do that when I go and sit down to meditate, and I've got a notepad and a pen, and I can just sort of move down the page. One of those old stenography books is a really good size notebook, and I can move down the page, putting those notes down, and then my mind will get still because I've remembered what I forgot, or every my first level of reminder from my subconscious or from my spirit has been those things. And then I can drop down deeper into the space of the silence. And I can ask a question. Should I do A or B? Or I can just be like, what do I need to know? What do I need to know today? And a thought comes, an image, an impression. It can be visual, like an internal eye, mind's eye kind of visual, not a like seeing a movie, but just an impression, a memory, a thought. It can be it can come as words, like a sentence. It can come as an impression in bodily sensation, or a sense of knowing. Sometimes it'll even be my grandmother's perfume and an awareness of her presence, right? But other times it's just a sense of knowing, like I know something. And with that knowing, just to take the moment and to let it impress you, so that when you come back and you get up and you grab your keys to run out the door and drive to work or whatever it is, you remember what came to you in that space. And it is your intuitive inner guidance system. None of us are here alone. No matter how alone you are, how alone you've been for the last 15 plus months, 15 and a half months, whatever it is, of lockdown, or of, this isolation many of us have been in. As the world comes back out of lockdown, as you come back out, or whatever it's been for you, if you had to stay out there as an essential worker, as an underpaid person who just couldn't afford or didn't have the kind of job you could go virtual, or if you've been, virtually alone for the past 15 months, whatever that's been for you, as you're in this space, you've had intuitive knowings through the past year and a quarter. You've had intuitive knowings all your life. You continue to have intuitive knowings. So let me encourage you today to pay attention to them. There is a book by a man by the name of Gavin De Becker. His book was on Oprah a couple of times, in an anniversary edition, whatever. The book is called The Gift of Fear. I consider it one of the best relationship manuals ever written, because it teaches you how to notice when someone's manipulating. But also in that space, in The Gift of Fear, he talks about, he's calling what I call intuition, he calls fear. And he's, saying as evolutionary animals, we have this, the same kind of urge to protect ourselves as the deer or the gazelle does from the lion. And we'll get a sense. We'll get a sense of when something's dangerous. We'll get a sense when we should move, or we'll get a sense to go do something. And he's, he talks about how we argue with our intuition because we think we need this reason, right? But he's like, no, your intuition is all the reason you need. The fact that it's coming to you through those gut feelings, the fact that it's intuition, obey it. Just do it. Just follow that guidance. You'll see why later. Or maybe you won't because you went the other way home and you avoided having an accident, right? Or maybe the one morning, and I'll briefly say, I was driving to campus one morning, starting out to drive to school and to teach. And I was, I was supposed to go, or maybe I was supposed to go to a meeting, whatever it was that day, but I was driving to campus. I needed to go to campus. And I'm starting to turn on to this road that there's a long stretch of it where you can't turn around. Once you're on it, you're on it until you get to like way down. And so I'm starting to head that way, and my gut is twisting. Like that space, we actually have neurons, we have brain neurons or neurological kinds of cells in a portion of our intestines. And so there's that space. It's kind of solar plexus. It's kind of, by your near your navel. It's sort of your stomach, but it's not your stomach in a sense of the digestive organ. It's just that sort of, feels a little higher than the navel, like where your rib cage comes together at the bottom, the solar plexus, that spot where, my brother punched me once in the gut, in my solar plexus, knocking the wind out of me, and I couldn't catch my breath. I mean, we were like, 8. And, he was being a brother. It wasn't, abuse, but he accidentally, it was sort of intentional, sort of not, but he actually knocked the wind out of me. And so that place right where the V comes to, the wishbone at the bottom of your rib cage, that space started to feel funny. And I wanted to turn around and go home. And I was like, no, my mind was, no, I have to go. I'm supposed to be, whatever it was, I'm supposed to be at this event. Actually, I think it might have been a special event, but I'm supposed to be at this event. And so I turned onto the road, and I was really, pretty strongly didn't want to. And there was one block, I had one traffic light where I could turn left and get back off it. And then otherwise I'd have been stuck on it all the way, like a long distance. And so I turn onto the road, fighting with my own intuition. I should have turned around and gone home before that, but I get on the road, and then I was just like, okay, I give up. The feeling got worse. So I turned again and I started to head home. And then an announcement came on the news radio that, gives you the traffic and weather report. The announcement came and it said that my campus and the whole town my campus was in had been closed down from bomb threats. We have an intuitive inner guidance system, and I should know better by now than to not have followed it more quickly. But thankfully I followed it in time, and nothing blew up as well. But there was still, it was absolutely telling me, you don't need to go to campus. You're going to waste your time and your gas, and you could go do something else right now because, there's that grading you need to get done, because you can't go to campus. The town was closed, and I just like the little college town was closed. So just there is that space. So you're not alone. You can follow your subconscious and your spiritual leading and come through to the other side of whatever it is you are facing. Before we visualize our successfully continuing to come through this pandemic, I take a moment to rejoice with you if you have been vaccinated, because we've been vaccinated, and because fortunate enough that my grandchildren are old enough to have been vaccinated as well, and to be more than 2 weeks past their second dose, and me a couple of months past my second dose, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We were able to do a lot of really good things on Juneteenth and for their birthday. And so just taking a moment to say that those who have not been vaccinated are in error, and I'm not disrespecting. I understand hesitancy. I didn't want to be the first one to get it. I didn't want to be at the end of the line either, but I didn't want to be last. I didn't want to be first, and I didn't want to be last in line. But I came to understand that this vaccine has been worked on for more than 10 years, that it was created by brilliant people, including the brilliant Dr. Kismekia, I'm just based on her last name, Corbett, Kizzy Corbett, at the NIH, just people who had, been working because there had been SARS, because there had been MERS, because there had been these other viral contagions, and because it was clear, pandemics have happened through all of human history, it was clear there would be another pandemic, wherever the source or origin of this one is from, whatever they find when they finish that research is not the point. The point is that that virologists have realized there would be other pandemics. There will be more in the future. And so they were working on something, and this mRNA technology has been there for 10 years. They just needed this virus to be isolated so that they could plug it in, and we had the vaccine, right? So it's not a quick creation. On the other hand, now millions and millions of people have had it, and the range of side effects is not larger than what would happen in what they call the background, the number of people who would have had this or that happen to them anyway, right? And so, even so, though some of those things we're concerned about, the rate of myocarditis in children in naturally occurring is higher than the rate happening from, that the vaccine, and that which is happening from COVID is permanent or long-term, as opposed to that which is very, very temporary and treatable from the vaccine. So any side effects from the vaccine overwhelmingly are temporary and treatable. And even the blood clotting thing, once they figured out you don't give heparin, they're successfully treating the really, really rare incidents of that. So to trust the virus that has killed all of these people over the vaccine that has not, and that is protecting us, is really a mistake, logically, and your intuition is also telling you it is a mistake. There's a difference between fear and intuition. Fear's up here, intuition is from the gut, right? So at this point in the world, the confirmed cases around the globe have reached almost 179 million. And in the United States, confirmed, recognizing again that many, many cases have gone unconfirmed because there weren't tests, or people haven't bothered to get tested, or people were asymptomatic, or people, they live in other parts of the globe when there's not tests available. But at this point in the United States, confirmed cases are at the point of being 34,400,000. In the world, the deaths have reached almost 3.9 million, 3,868,577 deaths in the world confirmed to have been from COVID. Many, many people are dying in rural India with no test, no confirmation. Their stats aren't being included. In Brazil, the government has been of a mindset to not keep records or sufficient records. In many states in the United States, insufficient record keeping was happening all across this journey. In the United States, though, the confirmed death rate is now using ncov2019.live about an hour ago. The confirmed death rate is at 600 and almost 617,000, 616,920. So our deaths have dropped down. ncov 2019 would have them at about 267 per day. In the US, other sources are saying 170 a day. So somewhere in the vicinity, taking the middle of that road of that, about 200 people a day are still dying in the United States. In India, about 1,269 people are dying per day, and their total deaths have now reached 385,000 diagnosed, confirmed cases. So in that space, it's important to recognize a handful of other factors. From the beginning of the pandemic here, from um, wherever we find the first cases in the United States, whether that was January or February of 2020, or certainly by early to mid March, most of us were on lockdown. But from early 2020 until January 2021, we mostly had a variant that had come in from Italy, and not from China, but from Italy. And that's what came in through New York City into the airports. People who had visited Italy for their holiday, for Christmas or New Year's, whatever that was in that window of time, we had the Italian variant was predominated in the United States for the first basic year, 3/4 of a year of the pandemic. As of January 2021, it began to yield over to the British variant, and in about a month's time, almost all of the cases in the United States were the UK variant. We are now experiencing, so the UK had the UK variant. It was 50% more transmissible than the Italian variant that had been there before. Now the UK has been overtaken by the variant from India, the Delta variant, and that variant is 60% more transmissible than the UK variant. So like they're 110% more transmissible than that first Italian variant. There are lower deaths right now because the older people got vaccinated first, so the people who were more likely to die rather than struggle through and survive a bad case of COVID have now, there was a wave of early deaths and then a wave of earlier vaccinations for those first over 75 and then those over 65. So it was a window before they extended it down in the United States to 21-year-olds. In the UK, they mostly vaccinated people with one dose, and instead of giving them their second dose at 3 weeks or 4 weeks when it was supposed to have happened according to the initial test, they just decided to give everybody a first dose, and then people were waiting months for their second dose. They're starting to get their second doses out to the broad population of the UK right now. Their cases are going up, but it is, again, also a younger population getting sick. We come over back to the United States. The Delta variant is here, and it is expected by some pretty brilliant researchers and scholars that so we're at we're June 20th. It's expected that in the next 3 or 4 weeks, in the next few weeks, that it will become that, as in the UK, the Delta variant will be what comes to predominate in the United States. So while we're outside more and while we're able to socialize in outside places more, and while where there's outdoor motion of air, there's less risk of contagion. There's still not zero risk of contagion if an infected person is breathing on you outside. If they get in your face and they're talking to you, or they're whatever, there's some stuff. It's not impossible for there to be an outdoor transmission person to person. It is less likely than indoor transmission, but those, we've been told, if we're fully vaccinated, if we're more than 2 or 3 weeks after our second dose, that we are safe even inside, even with an infected person. That being said, those who are pretending, those who are unmasked, even though they're not vaccinated, those who are dismissive of the virus, because some people are asymptomatic or because some people have mild cases, you don't know what kind of case you would have, and you don't know what kind of case you would have with new variants. So while those of us who are fully immunized are relatively safe, it is also not impossible for us to contract what would probably be a mild case. It's unlikely, but not impossible. There's a 5% chance if we're dealing with the Italian or the UK variant. There might be a larger than 5% chance. It might be down in the 80th percentile for us with the Delta variant. I don't like colds and I don't like flus, and I don't want a mild case either. So I'm continuing to wear a mask indoors with random people. I am unmasked finally with my children and grandchildren, and feeling confident in those spaces. But if I'm going into the grocery store, I'm going to still be wearing a mask. I think a lot of the people in the grocery store who are masked right now are vaccinated and just have been wise through the whole pandemic about being masked. And a lot of the people in a space like that who are unmasked are probably pretending to be fully vaccinated. Nobody can really check. And they're just, I'm vaccinated, and they're really not. And they are actually at risk because some of them could have it transmitted to each other. So from the perspective of the globe, this thing is not over. We're a long distance from inoculating, from immunizing nation, the 7 billion people in the world or whatever it is right now. This is not, not happening. There's 1 billion people in India. There's, really low vaccination rates, really low access, really low ability to get this to people. They would give anything for your vaccine opportunity. So if you're choosing to trust the virus rather than the vaccine, you're factually wrong. If you are, some people may have some sort of disease in themselves in which their own physicians are going, yeah, okay, maybe you shouldn't get the vaccine. They're relying on all of us who can get vaccinated to get vaccinated. And our children under the age of 12 cannot be vaccinated yet. And yet where we took my grandsons for their birthday, there were all sorts of unmasked people, including unmasked children, who cannot have been vaccinated. And while children have generally not contracted the Italian variant or the UK variant very often, we don't know what will happen with the Delta variant with children. And even in the British variant or the Italian variant, there have been some children hospitalized, some children with long-term harm from the virus, and some children who have died. And if you have a child, you know that that child is irreplaceable and their health is irreplaceable. And you can't get them vaccinated yet if they're under the age of 12, even in the United States. So be safe, keep them safe, have them wear the mask as they're supposed to. Maybe you should wear one in a grocery store, even if you're immunized, because you wouldn't want, it's a relatively low risk, but why bring it home to your kids, right? Just whatever. Each variant becomes a crapshoot. And let me see for just a moment if I can find this, but there is a quotation. There it is. No. Yes. So this is from a Mayo Clinic doctor, Dr. Gregory Poland, and it was a broadcast on 6/14/2021, so just a few days ago, 6 days ago. And this doctor, a virologist connected to the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Gregory Poland, made this statement, and I quote, I wrote this down exactly. He said, "Younger people are now bearing the brunt of this infection." And I think this is what escaped virtually everybody's notice. We are now entering into the most dangerous period of the pandemic for people who are not vaccinated, right? We were all wearing masks before. Anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers are not, and can now not in places where they were forced to before. Said, we are now entering into the most dangerous period of the pandemic for people who are not vaccinated. They now face very different variants, meaning it's different. It's a different virus. It's not a totally different virus, but they're very different variants. Now the advantages, we've learned how to care for them, and we know how to ventilate them. Even if you're a younger person, do you want to be ventilated because you didn't wear a mask, because you felt you were invincible? Like, what is that, right? But we know how to ventilate them, he said, but that's the risk they run in their faulty calculus about whether or to get the vaccine or not. It is a faulty calculus, according to Dr. Gregory Poland on 6/14/2021 on a Mayo Clinic virtual lecture. It's a faulty calculus to choose not to get the vaccine out of fear I didn't even feel it. And I hate needles. I'm telling you, neither dose. I didn't feel it. I was really glad I was watching her put it in, but I wanted the vaccine. By that point, I wanted it bad enough that I wanted to make sure I got it. Um, but I didn't feel that needle at all. Like, not at all. If I hadn't been looking, I would have been like, but you didn't do it yet. Like, really? And I can't look. Like when they're drawing blood or all that digging around they do for some of those. No, no digging around, nothing. Skinniest little needle you ever wanted to meet, had no idea, right? A few hours later, when they had a few side effects, and then it was like, oh, okay, yeah. If I hadn't have looked, I would have known it now. But still, they were very limited in time and duration. And so, really, listen to your gut. You're not alone in this world, but it's your wisdom that says, go get the vaccine. It's free. You don't need even to have insurance. You can pretty much walk into every kind of drugstore and grocery store and your doctor's office all over this country now. And just that you just, some places you can just walk in, other places you can call and get whatever. You can get that vaccine just by walking into the CVS across the street from me without an appointment. You walk in, you walk up, you say, I want the vaccine. They say, we'll be with you in a minute, have a seat over there. Then they're there in 3 minutes, and it's in your arm, and you go home and they give you the date to come back and they give you your CDC card. It's foolishness to make a fake one. It's foolishness to turn down this first world privilege that you have, that so many others are dying because they don't have. Anyway, fight the fight, help us through, help us make for herd immunity, help us make it so that those who really cannot get vaccinated for some reason, help us make it so they're safe, help us make it so our little kids are safe. Nobody's safe until overwhelmingly the majority of us do get vaccinated. And then there will continue to be variants for years to come because it's such a big job to get the world vaccinated. And because it's going to take the will of capitalist governments and even of authoritarian fascist governments. It's going to take the will of democracies and autocracies. It's going to take the will of all of those leaders to both allow and to fund and to continue to pay for this vaccination of the billions of human beings on the planet before this virus can be eradicated. Be wise. So we're going to just take a moment. I want you to notice whether your eyes are open or your eyes are closed, that there is that space inside you, in your gut, where you get intuitive knowings, where you get feelings, where you get a desire to call Joe, or a twisty feeling if you pick up the phone to call Joe, where you get wisdom. Sometimes it's as simple as common sense. And sometimes it's just, I want to, or I don't want to. I don't want to go to the store right now. I really don't want to go to the store today. I just don't want to. I don't want to. And then you do, and then you're like, oh man, this bad thing happened. I should have just stayed home, right? Sometimes it's so simple, you don't even know it's intuition, right? It's just strong desire or lack of desire, strong aversion to something. Those are all intuitive knowings. And then there's that red light, green light feeling in the gut. Do this, don't do that. And then there's the thoughts that come in the middle of the night. Text your kid, tell him to drive slower. Tell them it's time to come home now. When you weren't worrying about them, just that thought that dawns on you like a light bulb, or that rises up and dawns on your conscious awareness, right? That subconscious thing that's just below the surface that becomes surface. Or there's the fact you sat down and took a moment to tune in, to meditate, to ask a question. What should I do? How do I help my friend or relative or loved one through this situation? Which job should I choose? Just the sitting down and the tuning in and the paying attention to all of the bodily sensations and that feeling in your gut, the holding, if I do this, what happens? And if I do that, what happens? And letting picture image come to your mind. If I do this, if I take this job, 5 years down the road, will I like the people? Will I feel, will it be a good space? Will I feel good in it? Will they feel good with me? If I take this one, what's it feel like in 5 years? Which one feels lighter? Which one feels heavier? Which one feels like it's calling me? Which one feels like it's pushing me back? Which one am I repulsed from? Just start taking a moment to tune in, recognize you are a spiritual being. Also recognize that not only, as that doctor said, are those who are unvaccinated facing the most dangerous part of the pandemic yet. I don't know that it will be the most dangerous ever, because I don't know if there are other variants, that will arise in the window of time it takes for humanity to get vaccinated, the multi-year window. But we do know the Delta variant's more dangerous than the others that we've already been through. And we do know that we're already at 617,000 dead in the United States and 3.9 million dead in the world. So, we know that. But that, not only that, we also know we're at great risk democratically. We are not yet coming around the bend to midterm elections, but we will. And we know that there are those who intend to take our ability to vote away, who intend to rob us of our freedoms and liberties. The Supreme Court just this week, during Pride Month, ruled against LGBTQ people, ruling that it is the right of religious organizations to discriminate against LGBTQ people. I understand freedom of religion. I'm an ordained minister, have been an ordained minister for 20 plus years. Understand that. I got that. Maybe it's way more than 20. But anyway, I understand that. Don't want freedom of religion abridged. Don't want your freedom to practice religion, or your freedom to not be forced to practice religion, or to not be forced to practice a particular religion. Don't want that abridged. On the other hand, since 1969, LGBTQ people have been fighting for their rights. And if the same issue had arisen in regard to race, it would be ruled unconstitutional. But since there's religion involved, then you can discriminate against gay people. There used to be some religious folk who believed it was that it was God telling them to discriminate on grounds of race. I don't know that couldn't come back again based on some of these religious freedom, air quotes, freedom rulings. So we have a Supreme Court that is ruling against the rights of a segment of our population that is not insignificant in size. We're facing a lot of dangers in regard to freedom, in regard to democracy, in regard to voting rights. We haven't passed an anti-lynching bill. We haven't passed a police reform act. We haven't put teeth back in the Voting Rights Act. We haven't passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or HR 1, which is in the Senate now. So just with me, let's raise the elevation. Let's elevate the vibration. Recall in your mind's eye, whether your eyes are opened or closed, recall the sense of America that you were given, whether you bought it or not, based on your lived experience, which may be raised, right? Whether you have experienced the United States as a place where you had freedom, or experienced the United States as a place that you didn't have freedom and the stuff was all talk and no substance. Still, take a moment and feel the feeling of the ideal As President Biden said not so long ago, week and a half ago, America is the only nation founded on an idea, the idea of liberty and justice for all. Whether Jefferson meant it or not, there is the idea, the ideology, the ideal written into the Declaration of Independence, into the Constitution. Well, the Constitution had the 3/5 of a person thing for people who were Black, but just imagine you actually have rights. Imagine you have the right to freedom of and from religion. Imagine you have the right to a free press. Imagine you have the right to freedom of speech. Imagine you have the right to protest for a redress of grievances without states passing laws that say that protesters can be run over with automobiles or trucks, vehicles. Imagine a country in which everything is done to make it possible and easier for you to vote. Mail-in ballots, multiple forms of ID, in case you don't have a reason to have a driver's license or to go to the DMV. Imagine, that they take your electric bill. Imagine that you just have to prove you, once. Just imagine a country where your right to vote is honored, sacred. I grew up thinking it was. There's motion afoot right now in my state to make it harder for people like me to vote. There's a demonization of anyone who voted one way instead of the other. Just, there are new calls for insurgencies and insurrections. Imagine a world in which there are peaceful transitions of power again, and in which no one is above the law, no matter how rich or what office they hold, and a world in which the law works for the poor, not against the poor, but for the poor, and for those of various minority group statuses, works for gay people, works for trans people, works for Black people, works for all of us. Just feel that feeling and hold that image that around the globe, autocrats are swept off the stage of human history, removed from power, that people like Bolsonaro in Brazil, who deny COVID and deny help to their people and cause millions and millions to die unnecessarily, see their time being done, see a change, a shift, see real, true servant of the people leaders in every office, in every land. And imagine a world in which people are wise enough to make the necessary changes in how we power and fuel our lives for our species to survive. We have become an endangered species in the 6th mass extinction, and it's not wrong. Every reputable scientist around the globe recognizes the truth. Everyone who's got anything to do with that kind of science recognizes the truth of global climate change. And that climate change is one that threatens our survival, both through what it does to temperature, what that does to crops, what that does to food sources of all kinds, vegetarian and carnivore. Yeah. Also, the polar ice caps really are melting. That's real, right? Visualize with me that we make the stop in time. Be well, be safe. Your spirit inside you, your intuition, whatever that is, whether that's God or your spirit guides or you as a person with your evolutionary instincts of survival, as Gavin de Becker would argue, whatever that is, you've been brought thus far and you will be kept until you're safely home. Be well. Enjoy this week of June. I hope the weather is beautiful where you are as it is here. And I will see you again next Sunday. Be blessed.